Welcome to the podcast. This is the first episode of Stories of Learning, where we dive into the learning process and explore the amazing journey of learning. My background is music, so we'll have plenty of musicians on here, but not exclusively. The most important thing in this podcast is that these ideas of the learning process are applicable to every field. We just have to take those lessons and stories and apply them to our own worlds. Every episode will have a guest in to listen and hear all about them, their journey, their approach to learning, and more. And throughout the process, we'll be using the incredible book, The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin, to guide us through these episodes. Josh's book is a really incredible story, discovering his process of learning through his career as a chess master, as well as a Tai Chi Chuan martial artist. It's a really, really great book, so I definitely recommend you check it out. I'm going to post a link in it after each episode so you can check that out for yourself. But we'll be using the chapters as we go through as kind of concept headers, so you can check out each chapter and see what you think of it, and yeah, we'll hear what our guests think about it, and we'll learn together. So without any more delay, let's introduce our guest, Chris Stephenson.
Hey, my name's Chris. I'm 28, and I was born in Ottawa, Canada, but raised all over the world because I'm a military brat. I'm a professional drummer, and I've toured the globe with various artists, Canadian artists, a Swedish artist, and my own band, Old James, that I have with my brother. And I guess not recently, but in my drumming career, I've developed a knack for teaching and an interest for teaching. And I would just say, as a professional drummer, I perform, I record, and I teach.
Yeah, cool. You've been working on a new, like a kind of concept for a book that you've been working on as well. That's kind of been your focus recently, right?
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, that was kind of my main goal to get you onto this, to because I know that you've been focusing on teaching a lot, and I guess understanding how you approach things and maybe how students approach things and stuff like that. So I've just kind of taken some of the ideas from The Art of Learning and organized them into kind of specific concepts, and that way I can ask you about them and see what you think about them, and and yeah, hear a little bit about your story. The first segment that I want to dive into is 2 approaches to learning. Okay, so this is about how you view progress. So in Josh's book, he identifies 2 different types of learners: entity learners and incremental learners. And I'm going to quote a small part of the book here. Josh says, "Children who are entity theorists, that is, kids who have been influenced by their parents and teachers to think in this manner, are prone to use language like 'I'm smart at this' and to attribute their success to their success or failure to an ingrained level of ability." Okay. Incremental theorists who have picked up a different modality of learning, let's call them learning theorists, are prone to describe their results with sentences like "I got it because I worked very hard at it," or "I should have tried harder." So what's your experience with these 2 different types of learning? I definitely see you as an incremental learner.
Yep.
But were you always that way? What do you think?
Well, yeah, when it comes to myself, I'm definitely an incremental learner, and I've always been that way because I was raised in a military family. So the way I was raised was you have to work hard for what you earn, yeah, and what you're already capable of achieving, but it's not talent, it's tenacity. You have to be tenacious, and if you really want it, you'll work hard at it, and that's where success comes. But the first one,
the entity a learner.
Yeah, the entity learner, I come across so many of those when I teach, because there's so many kids that come from families where it's already been ingrained in their mind. As soon as they walk in there, they're not necessarily open to learning. It's more or less they don't pay attention because they feel like they already have it, because they come from a statute of
You either have it or you don't, kind of thing. That
Exactly.
I feel like it's definitely a risk of at least that people like you and I have in the music world, of people thinking that you are either talented or not.
Hmm.
And when you take lessons, a lot of the time kids can see it that way. They're either talented or they're not, and that can come out like as the lessons progress. I think they can start to decide for themselves. If the teacher isn't guiding it properly, then they can kind of start to think, I'm either I'm either good at this or maybe it's just not meant for me, right? So then I think that's when we have to step in and explain like the incremental point of view, right?
Exactly.
So like how do you approach that with your students then? Like if you can tell that they aren't incremental learners,
Hmm.
how do you approach trying to show them that they can be, I guess?
I kind of let them run their own course at the beginning
Yeah.
because they are who they are, and my job is not to change them, but to show them a different perspective. And so I basically just continue to slip in these other perspectives and see what garners their curiosity the most.
Okay.
And then as soon as I see that spark happen, that's what I go after. And just
Hmm.
to kind of open, and it might come from many different, like if we look at it in a circular way, and the goal being in the middle, they might be attracted to this openness through theory, through technique, through sound, through
Yeah.
feel, So I always try and approach that openness in many different ways.
And try and figure out what they're into.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I definitely find that with my own students as well. If you can find where the door opens,
Yeah,
then then it becomes a whole journey of growth.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I guess the challenge becomes sometimes making the switch
Mm-hmm.
and trying to show them that if you do put a little bit of effort in, then you can get better. And it just
Yep.
takes. I've been doing that a lot recently with some of my students, is showing them how to play and doing it at a slow tempo, and just showing them that if we just bump it up a little bit every couple minutes,
Mm-hmm.
in 15 minutes you'll be good at it. Like
Yep.
you'll have it pretty well down.
Exactly.
And that's just because we went step by step growing it to that,
Yeah,
right?
it's like small practical goals. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Whereas, and I'm sure you can see this from a drumming point of view, if you try to do like a fill, like a
Mm-hmm.
super complicated fill from the beginning at the proper tempo,
Yeah.
it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
But if you start it off slow and work your way up, you can get to the finish line
Yeah.
a lot faster.
Exactly. Yeah. That's it.
I think that trying to show them that path is the challenge then.
Yep.
How do you get a student to see that it's not about instant gratification right now? It's about,
Exactly. Yeah.
if you do this a little bit today and a little bit tomorrow and a little bit the next day, then by next week, it hasn't been that long, but you have progressed so much.
Yeah. Yeah. You hit the nail on the head of like that is our goal as teachers, is to show them that this routine is quite simple. It's like the whole keep it simple, stupid approach of
Yeah.
like just one step at a time and enjoy the process. So I think if we can show them that this process of learning and growth is a fun process and
Yeah.
it's intriguing and it's interesting, then yeah, I think that's our goal as teachers.
I try to show my students. I'll show my students videos of players on YouTube, because YouTube and Instagram, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
are just taken over by people that can shred and can play
Yeah.
crazy stuff, and it's all awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But I try to at least share with my students the idea that a lot of that is because they took the steps to get there, not because there's some amazing like innate talent that person had.
Exactly.
That
Yeah.
person just probably, I would say, as a, like from experience and as a teacher, that them getting to that goal is because they had the kind of diligence to do the steps to get
Exactly.
there.
Yeah, because Instagram and YouTube and whatnot, it's mainly just smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
But we know that those players, worked hard and were patient and went through the process.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you end up just seeing the end.
Well, now they can glorify it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's cool. So let's talk a little bit about the next segment then, the next question. Because this one kind of leads into that one,
Okay.
which is making smaller circles. I really like this one, and I use it a lot. It's the idea of taking a lot of information, or taking in a lot of information, learning really how things work so well that you don't have to think about it as much,
Yep.
right? Like you just understand it so thoroughly that it kind of becomes second nature to
Yep.
you. And so as a drummer, how do you see that being applied to what you learn or how you play or how you try to teach people? Because like taking the smallest finger movement and having that connect to your whole arm moving.
Yeah.
From what I see and what I do on my instrument, it's zooming in really close and figuring out just how your fingers move and doing that really well so that you can then zoom out and do the whole process together.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, well, one thing I've always told my students is the concept of riding a bicycle. So, like when, like I find drumming, because it's such a physical instrument, a lot like riding a bicycle, because when we were young and we watched the older kid ride a bicycle, we go, oh, wow, that looks very easy. And what's the first thing that happens when we try a bicycle? We fall and scrape our knees and start crying. And then we get tricycles, and baby steps at a time, we eventually remove those. But the cool thing with bicycling and drumming is once you've reached that muscle memory, you'll know it for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And so that's how I look at each individual step I make as a drummer is riding a bicycle. So is learning how to ride a bicycle.
Here's a really, really interesting like side story that I might not have shown you before, but basically there's a YouTuber who's totally awesome. His name's Destin.
Okay.
And he has a YouTube channel called Smarter Every Day.
Okay.
You definitely want to check that out. And in one of the videos, Destin takes a bike that one of his mechanic friends or engineer friends has made, that when you ride it, the handlebars act in the opposite direction.
Okay.
So when you turn left, it actually turns the wheel to the right? So it took him months of practice every day to be able to ride that bike, because there's a lot happening when you ride a bike.
Oh yeah.
Just like with an instrument, there's a lot that's going on, right? That you take for granted once you can ride a bike. You know what I mean? You don't think about any of that. But so it takes him months to try and ride this bike, and eventually it kind of just clicks and he can do it.
Yeah.
And so he literally feels this kind of transition that happens, and then he can do it. His son, who's I think he's 7 or 8, gets it in 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay.
Easy in comparison, right? Because his brain's still at that state of
absorption.
Yeah, and he can just, it's a game, and he just learns it.
Yeah.
It's still hard, but he learns it in a fraction of the time, right? So the really weird thing about that, and why I wanted to bring this up, is that when Destin tried to ride a normal bike, he couldn't do it.
Okay.
So he lost that kind of that muscle memory and everything that he had trained for so long. But yeah, he literally has to spend all this time retraining what we thought to be easy and that you take for granted because you've been doing it for so long. But
for sure.
I like that analogy of riding a bike, because not many people just skip to riding a bike. Like you said, they do the trike, and then they do the training wheels and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and they work their way up to it. It takes you one time of riding a real bike and falling to decide that you want to work your way up to it, kind of thing,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
And we're willing to do that, I guess is my point. We're willing to take the time to do that,
Mm-hmm.
because if you don't, there's like a physical incentive to not ride a real bike. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
if you fall, you probably are going to go to the training wheels kind of thing first, and then go through the process, and then eventually you get to the end, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that as musicians, sometimes we try to skip the steps.
Yeah.
And it's because a lot of my students, at least, I don't know about your students, but a lot of my students think that if I just try it fast and just go for it a bunch of times, that I'll get it.
Yeah.
But if you use that time, and it's about having the kind of state of mind to be able to go slowly from the beginning.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and understanding that instead of wasting not wasting, but instead of using the half an hour to like try this fast fill and fail at it a ton of times, if you just started it off slowly, by the end of the half hour you'd probably have it down.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's one thing I learned at the Benny Greb camp. Even if we take the process of starting slowly and learning something, a lot of us, as soon as we get it the first time, we stop and we move on to something
Yeah,
new.
after you get the one time.
Yeah, exactly. Because then you're like, okay, I've finally reached it. I've spent days and hours on this thing, and I finally got it. I'm going to move on to the next thing. But that does not ingrain that into our minds, into our memory. We need to then repeat it multiple
Exactly. And there's I know you've been doing a lot of stuff with quintuplets, like working with quintuplets and stuff like that, which if we're not sure what that is, it's just a grouping of five notes, or a pattern of five.
Grouping of 5 16th notes per quarter note.
There you go. There you go. Okay, so I was at Victor Wooten's camp in Nashville, and I was talking with his brother Roy Wooten, who's feature man from the Flecktones, and we were working on a 5-note sequence on the bass, which included like pops and slaps and hammer-ons and everything like that. It was just a group of 5 things, basically. And he was, by the way, I hope to have Roy on an episode, so that's going to be awesome. But anyways, Roy's big thing was on, once you get it that first time, like you said, just stay with it for like a good amount of times, and that's where I really see the making smaller circles concept come in, where you get that first time and then you zone into it and zoom in and stay there until it feels comfortable and natural, and that's the big thing at Victor's camps that he talks about a lot, is making things natural, right? Which in the drumming world, I can imagine is a huge deal, obviously, because if you're sounding robotic on the kit, then it's not a fun time for most people.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so the third and final segment that I want to jump into is called building your trigger.
Okay.
And this one is really interesting. In the Art of Learning, Josh talks about a concept that he calls building your trigger. He talks about creating a routine or pattern that kind of acts as a prelude to being in a certain state of mind.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so if you have a show or a gig and you want to make sure you're in the zone, whatever that might be, then and for him, in Josh's world of chess or martial arts, he gets into the game state, right, where he's ready for the game. And for a musician, it would be getting on stage, or for teaching, it's getting ready for being in the classroom with that student, right?
Yeah.
So do you have a process that you go through, or have you experimented with making processes or routines that get you into that, whatever that state of mind is?
Well, it's interesting is not really, like I've never had a routine beforehand that has prepared me for any type of situation. I think through experience now, I've been through so many different kinds of situations. And one thing I learned is that regardless of how I'm feeling, I have to do the best I can with what I have right now in that particular situation.
Yeah.
Whether we're talking about gear, teaching, performing, it's kind of like regardless of what's happening in your mind or externally, you have to do the best you can with what you have right now
Yeah.
in the moment. Yeah.
And it's cool that you said that, because in the book he mentions that having that like half-hour routine or whatever before a chess match or before a show or something like that is nice, but what if the schedule changes?
Exactly.
You can't have everything collapse because you
Yeah.
because you didn't get to do your whole routine, basically, right? So
Exactly. Yeah.
it's being able to switch into that headspace, whatever it is, and just be ready for the new scenario, like
Yep.
what's happening right now.
Totally.
Yeah. And what I find more important for me, because I think you're a little bit like me in the fact that like our brains are just going a 1,000 miles a minute
Oh yeah.
all the time, and new ideas here and there and all over the place. So how do you not stop, but how do you slow that down? Because you got to slow it down at some point.
Yeah, that's a very good question. What I've found recently, the only way I can slow down my thought process is by acting on these thoughts.
Okay, so having a finish line for them.
Well, yeah, and I think it's more or less like what I've experienced sometimes is like anxiety, nervous breakdowns. Like, you know what I mean? Because I have like this goal and the whole overwhelming state of like doing too many things at one time. And like I've learned for myself, it's just about taking action on just one step.
Yeah.
And regardless of how much time that takes, I feel better that I took the step. And then that actually in itself kind of slows me down because I realize, oh, by taking that first step, it really wasn't that hard. It, it wasn't as stressful as I anticipated. And it actually kind of like slowed me down for the rest of the process.
Interesting. So getting started on the process.
Just getting started, yeah.
Yeah. Instead of because that's something that happens to me a lot as well, is having so much going on in your head with ideas or things you have to learn or do or whatnot, that as soon as for me, what I do is or what I find helps is if I write things out so I can see it visually.
Yeah.
Then I can kind of let go of it a little bit from my head, and that starts that journey of doing. Okay, that's the first step. So then it's just a matter of, it seems really simple, and it is simple, and I think that's why it works. Is just crossing the first thing off the list.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Even if it's a small thing, that kind of sense of being, to have completed something.
Yep.
And be like, okay, now things are on the way.
Exactly. Yeah. It's really like, and this is coming from one of the biggest procrastinators in the world. I mean, we all are.
Yeah.
Right. And I've just learned for myself. Yeah, it's about taking that first step and just starting the process. And then I find for myself that like I'll learn what is actually interesting to me and what I'm going to finish versus, you know what, I took the step and I feel good that I took the first step, but this avenue is not for me. Yeah. So I'm going to move on to the next thing.
Yeah. And being aware enough to, like, growing enough and being aware enough to see that, okay, maybe not this one. And to put your focus into something else.
Well, yeah, because our greatest commodity is time. And the one thing we can't buy is time.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
Yeah, you really have to pick and choose what you're going to do. But the most important thing is you'll never know until you've taken that first step.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so then do you have, even in the smallest sense, if it's time for it, because like if old James, your band is getting ready to do a show or something like that, is there any process that you go through to get into any sort of state of mind, or have you done it enough that was the process?
Okay, exactly what I had mentioned before about experience. I feel like at the very beginning, I remember my first international gig was in London, England, at the Underworld in Camden Market. Place was sold out. My mom flew over to see it. Like it
That's
was
awesome.
like, and we flew in like the morning of, you know,
There
because
you
we
go.
flew overnight, landed in London, had to do the show. I was puking my guts out from nervousness. I remember my left arm turning to jello for some odd reason
There
in the
you
first
go.
song. You know, like, so I've gone through all of those things, and I've been performing for over 10 years now, and I don't even warm up, nothing, no mental. Maybe there might be that little bit of butterflies or nervousness, but like
Yeah.
it's adrenaline, so it's like it's a good thing, and I think it's healthy to have a bit of that. Like it's pumping yourself up mentally and physically for the show.
Victor always says that most of that nervousness is excitement,
Yes.
anyways. So
Yeah.
you just got to
Exactly.
recognize it as that. And then,
Totally. Yeah. And then like then you just do your thing,
yeah,
and you'll only do the best you ever can if you
yeah,
just let yourself.
yeah. And then I think that I see that kind of mentality a lot of, or I try to use that mentality a lot of being like, it's going to be whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And any last minute cramming or anything like that is not like, there's no time for that anymore. So it's just going to be whatever it is.
Yeah, that's it.
And,
Yeah.
and that's not meaning like that before the show, you get to be lazy and not do anything, but it's knowing that you've done all the prep that you could have.
Yep.
So
You did the
now
best
now
you
it is
can.
whatever it is.
Or you did the best you could.
Yeah, and yeah, it just whatever comes out of it is whatever comes out of it.
Yep.
And you can look back at it after and say, maybe, you know, if I work on this or work on that, then I can do that better. But it's not. I find that it's not worth stressing about that,
Yep.
because there's nothing you can do about it in
That's
the
it.
moment, anyways. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, well, very cool. That's the end of the stories of learning section.
Okay, yeah.
Now I just want to go through a really quick. I'm going to call this section "Questions to Make Questions."
Mm-hmm.
So just some kind of lightning questions that I'm going to ask. Just a quick answer, whatever you think. But it's just to kind of get you and me and whoever's listening to just think about some of these things and,
Yep.
and what would the answer be for you. That's basically how I think of it.
Mm-hmm.
So the first question is, what is your life's intention?
Okay, yeah. So my life's intention would be to inspire,
Cool.
and yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Nice. Nice short answer. So then that leads into the next one, which is, where is your life's attention to make that happen?
Okay, so for me, it's learning myself in order to teach what I've learned and the knowledge I've
Mhm.
gained, because all of my experiences through my eyes will be completely different than every single other person's on this planet.
Exactly. Yeah. Very cool. Okay, and then the last one, and this is just a fun one, but it sounds like it's a fun question,
Yeah.
and it is, but it's also I've found that the more you think about it, the deeper you can go, and then you can spend a lot of time on it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I read
Okay.
this question
Yeah.
before. Yeah.
So, what do you know for sure? Simple
Nothing.
question. There you go. Right? So, if you had to think of like anything in the performing world, the teaching world, drumming world, whatever it is, what's one thing that you could say you know for sure?
Well, when it comes to the drumming world and music in general, is that we all have access to the same knowledge.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that, just to elaborate, is I remember when I had that Skype meeting with Benny Greb about my book and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
he really pointed out, he goes, well, my book is nothing new. Your book is nothing new.
Yeah.
Music theory is nothing new. We're all just borrowing the same concepts that have always been around.
Yeah.
We're just approaching it in a different way, and we're sharing the way that we approach it. And it may work for some people, and it may not.
Yeah.
But this whole language that we've written of music theory is just a written language.
Yeah.
And it's
Languages change.
yeah, and it's sort of yeah, exactly, and it's just sort of like irrelevant, and it's is relative. Is what I'm
Yeah,
trying to say.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, not irrelevant. It's relative.
yeah,
Because it's just time. It's something that we kind of came up with so that we could communicate.
yeah. And I think that's what it comes down to for sure is communication, um, or being able to, if you want to, and like the discussion of music theory is one that we don't have time to dive into, but
Exactly. Yeah.
but that's cool. Okay, so I have my last section, my last segment, which I watched this Kurt Vonnegut lecture.
Mm-hmm.
Really funny video, just of him explaining the storylines, like how story arcs work.
Yep.
And it was one of those kind of, it was a funny little lecture, but then at the end it had like some kind of heavy truth in it,
Okay.
I would say. And that might just be me reading too much into it, but I think I got something out of it. And he described how basically we don't know what the good news is and what the bad news is most of the time. It's hard to tell. So then my last question is there a story or something that's happened in your life where you thought something was bad news, or you thought something was good news or whatever, and it didn't come out as what you expected, kind of thing?
Yeah, you know what I find every time I go through a breakup, whether I have to break up with the person or they break up with me,
Yeah.
that's always like bad news that ends up being good for
Yeah.
some reason or another. And
Yeah.
it's one of those things where whether it's a relationship or a death or a loss, some sort of loss,
Mm-hmm.
which is always bad news, is in that moment, if you only knew what was coming,
Mm.
it wouldn't seem so bad
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah.
You know, like
And yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's kind of the point that Kurt was trying to make in the lecture, was that you don't know what's happening. You don't know what that's going to lead to, and it's not trying to make those things sound like they're not important. It can lead to something else, and
Well, exactly,
and it's
yeah.
impossible to tell if it's going to really be good or if it's going to really be bad. And I think that goes back to what you were talking about with going on stage and performing. That really all that matters is right now on the stage, anyways. So
yeah,
you're just going to go for it and give it what you can and see what it ends up as later, right?
Yep.
So
that's it.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think the same thing goes for good news.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the whole idea of like if it's too good to be true, it probably is. You know,
Yeah.
and like I think it's all about being as stoic as possible with everything that comes at us, because whether it's a loss or it's amazing news, you'll never know the outcome.
Yeah.
You know,
What's that going to lead to? So you might as well just make the best of it if you can.
that's it. Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I want to say thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
Thank you
Thanks
for being
having
part
me.
of it. Thanks for being my first guest on the show. It's going to be awesome. I have a few people lined up for the next few episodes, so that's going to be really fun. And I'm going to post any links that you have to like your pages or anything like that. I'll post those when the podcast comes up. That'll be in the links below. And yeah, sounds good.
Cool.
Thank
Thanks,
you
Jordan.
so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so that's the end of episode 1 with Chris Stephenson. Be sure to subscribe and like and share the podcast if you enjoyed it. And next week, we'll see you again for the next episode.